You are a woman living in 16th century Istanbul. The year is 1520, and you have been chosen from among the most beautiful captives of the Caucasus. Your fate sealed not by bloodline or crime, but by grace. The ship that carried you here reeked of salt, tar, and endings. Now, as you pass through the gates of Topkapi Palace, the scent changes. Rosewater, amber, and fear. Your slippers make no sound on marble polished smooth by generations of the unseen. Beside you walks an elderly attendant veiled in black. "Do not speak unless spoken to," she murmurs. "Do not meet another's eyes too long. Silence is safety." You nod. You have already learned that the Empire's first language is silence. Before we continue, where are you watching from tonight? Istanbul? London? Jakarta? Karachi? The wonder of history is that it binds strangers across oceans and centuries. If the secrets of forgotten worlds fascinate you, stay close, because inside these walls, even silence has power. The harem was never a garden of desire. It was an architecture of control. The palace itself was a machine built from corridors, courtyards, and locked doors, each designed to separate and observe. Fountains gurgled not for beauty, but for secrecy, masking conversations from ears hidden behind lattice screens. Footsteps were measured. Laughter was dangerous. Here, noise was rebellion. When new captives arrived, they were stripped of their names. A girl from the Danube became Aner. Another from Crete was Nergis. Identity dissolved into fragrance and fabric. The first lesson came at dusk, when the chief Kalphus gathered them in the Hall of Discipline. "Obedience," one intoned, "is the path to peace." Then came the second. "Beauty, if uncontrolled, is a crime." Every act was ritual. How to kneel, how to lower the gaze, how to pour sherbet without spilling a single drop. Even silence had tempo. Pause too long, and it became insolence. The eunuchs, black-robed, unreadable, watched from the thresholds. They spoke rarely, but their presence reminded every woman that within the Sultan's house, men without desire enforced desire's boundaries. When night fell, the palace turned into an echoing sea. Lanterns flickered through layers of carved cedar and silk. The women whispered prayers to forgotten gods. Somewhere beyond the baths, the Sultan's chamber waited. A sanctum no one entered uninvited, yet always within hearing. Once a concubine from Venice was caught humming while arranging the Sultan's robe. The next morning, her bed was gone, her scent replaced by sandalwood, her name forbidden. The lesson lingered longer than her song. Topkapi was a labyrinth of listening. The Sultan's private rooms were fitted with hidden apertures, narrow slits through which the chief black eunuch could observe every audience. Beneath the imperial apartments ran a service corridor known only to a few, the Corridor of Silence. Its walls absorbed sound, its air never moved. Through it, messages, gifts, and bodies traveled unseen. To live here was to perform. The women became actresses in an endless ritual of composure. Their gestures were studied, their glances rehearsed. Every movement could elevate or destroy them. A smile could summon favor or suspicion. The body was both instrument and evidence. Yet within this choreography, rebellion grew subtle roots. A glance held a second too long. A silk embroidery that concealed a name, thought erased. When a concubine bowed, the slight delay before she rose might carry defiance enough to be understood by another watching from afar. Beneath the empire's stillness, a current of quiet communication began to pulse, because the Sultan never slept alone. Yet no one ever stayed. To be chosen was glory. To remain was impossible. At dawn, each woman returned to her chamber escorted by guards who neither looked nor spoke. The bed was stripped, the sheets burned, the perfume replaced. Passion left no evidence. The empire required purity not of soul, but of record. In these rituals, love was bureaucratic. Desire was filed, scheduled, erased. The Sultan's chamber was not a place of pleasure. It was a stage where power proved itself human for a night. Even the moonlight seemed rehearsed, entering through latticed windows at the same angle every evening, as if trained to witness but never interfere. Beyond the gilded doors, the city of Istanbul slept. The Bosphorus shimmered under a crescent moon, carrying the empire's reflections toward the sea. But inside Topkapi, the air remained heavy, charged with breaths that dared not escape. A chronicler once wrote that the palace was so quiet that one could hear the roses wilt. He was wrong. The sound was there, just lower than hearing. The rustle of veils, the scrape of silk against marble, the heartbeat of an empire maintained through fear and fragrance. In the centuries to come, the archives would record the names of sultans, viziers, generals, but not the women who moved through these corridors like echoes. Yet it was here, in their silence, that the empire learned its most enduring lesson. Power depends on what remains unspoken. The lamps gutter. The last footsteps fade. Somewhere deep within the harem, a door closes with the soft finality of fate. The night holds its breath, and history, listening still, waits for the first whisper that dares to break the corridor's silence. The law was simple. The bed of the Sultan was to be shared, but never twice in a row. No woman, regardless of beauty, wit, or devotion, could see the morning light from the same pillow. It was a rule older than any dynasty's memory, whispered through centuries of conquest and caution. What began as protection for an empire became a ritual of quiet cruelty, a system designed to keep love itself from endangering the throne. The custom was not born from passion, but paranoia. Centuries before Hurrem Sultan's rise, Ottoman rulers had already learned that affection could kill empires faster than war. When the Sultan of all lands lay his head beside one woman too often, alliances wavered. When a single voice lingered in his ear after midnight, the empire trembled. Love was unpredictable, and unpredictability was weakness. So the court forged a law to make even the Sultan's desires obedient to empire. Each night, the ritual began with precision. The chief eunuch carried a sealed silk handkerchief, its color deciding who would be chosen: white for those recently favored, gold for those who had waited, black, rarely seen, meant exile. As the call to evening prayer faded from the city's minarets, the palace corridors darkened. Perfumed oil lamps were lit, casting the faint glow of amber through the screens. From her quarters, the chosen concubine would be summoned by whisper alone. No trumpets, no footsteps, just the slow sound of sliding doors, the hush of water being poured into a copper basin. Before entering the Sultan's chamber, she would be inspected, robes adjusted, scent corrected, jewelry chosen to reflect the Sultan's mood. The ritual was choreographed like war strategy, every detail calculated to maintain imperial balance. The moment she crossed the threshold, she ceased to exist as herself. She became the embodiment of obedience, a vessel of empire, and when the night ended, she would vanish again into silence. The law's cruelty was not in what it forbade, but in what it promised. Each woman who entered knew that her beauty could lift her from obscurity to unimaginable privilege, yet the same beauty ensured her loneliness. The Sultan never slept alone, yet no one ever stayed. Those words were carved into memory long before they were ever written. At dawn, when the muezzin's first call floated across the Bosphorus, the woman was required to rise without a word. No farewell, no touch. Her slippers were placed before the bed, facing the door, always the door. She would leave in silence, escorted by eunuchs, her veil drawn, her breath steady. No one saw her face again that morning. The sheets would be burned, the candles replaced, and the chamber aired with musk and cedar. By the time the next evening came, it was as if she had never been there at all. And yet, in the year 1520, that silence broke. Her name was Hurrem Sultan, born Alexandra Lisovska, a captive from Ruthenia whose laughter, it was said, could be heard even through marble. The chronicles record that one night she simply refused to leave. When dawn came, her slippers remained untouched. She greeted the morning beside Sultan Süleyman. It was an act that should have cost her life. Instead, it began a revolution. The palace erupted. The Valide Sultan, Süleyman's mother, demanded punishment. The chief eunuch reminded his master that no woman had ever been permitted to greet the sun at his side. Yet Süleyman, usually unshakable in protocol, said only, "Let her stay." The law cracked like glass. The ripples spread through every level of the harem. Senior concubines who had waited years for their second night raged in secret. Some plotted her downfall. Others watched with awe. Because for the first time in living memory, emotion, not policy, had entered the Sultan's bedchamber. Love, the most forbidden force of all, had defied the empire's geometry. But love inside Topkapi could never remain private. It was observed, recorded, and weaponized. Diplomats from Venice and Persia began reporting rumors of the Sultan's captivity by a single woman. The empire's image of divine control was in danger, and so the palace sought to contain what it could not forbid. The rule of one night was not abolished, but rewritten. Only one woman would ever be exempt. All others would continue to rise and vanish before dawn. Yet, even for Hurrem, the privilege carried poison. Her defiance made her untouchable, and her isolation absolute. As her influence grew, so did the danger around her. 2 concubines disappeared under mysterious circumstances, their names erased from the palace registry. The message was unmistakable. A woman could break a law, but never the silence that followed. Historians believe the rule persisted long after Hurrem's death, but altered, its cruelty hidden beneath ceremony. The handkerchiefs still passed from eunuch to eunuch. The lamps still burned low. The chosen still left before morning. But now, in the deepest hours of the night, some whispered stories of the one who had stayed. Her defiance became a ghostly precedent, haunting every chamber she once walked through. Was it love that changed the empire, or ambition disguised as devotion? The question still echoes through Ottoman archives. Letters written in delicate calligraphy hint at affection, but the margins tell another story, of surveillance, jealousy, and fear disguised as obedience. For even as Hurrem rose beside the Sultan, her every gesture was documented by scribes. Every glance, every word was preserved, as though the empire itself sought to prove that even love must be accounted for. And so the ritual continued. One night for each, then darkness. The system endured because it worked, not to protect the Sultan's heart, but to protect his throne. Emotional distance was not a side effect. It was the design. A ruler who belonged to no one could never be ruled. Still, on quiet nights when the wind moves through the old palace ruins, the legend persists. They say that once, long ago, a woman laughed in the Sultan's chamber and greeted the dawn unafraid. The echoes of that laughter, defiant, human, alive, still linger in the marble long after the empire itself has turned to dust. Because even in the house of silence, one voice dared to stay. In the harem, even silence had choreography. Every movement, a bow, a glance, the folding of silk, was a step in a dance older than memory. Behind every gilded door, women learned not only how to please, but how to disappear inside performance. Passion was rehearsed. Desire dictated. And obedience. That was the art form perfected to survive. The palace called it training. The women called it becoming heir. From the moment a new concubine arrived, the lessons began. She was first taught how to move, never too fast, never too slow, to breathe quietly enough that her presence would not disturb the sound of the Sultan's pen, to smile without showing teeth, to speak only when addressed, and even then, as if her voice belonged to someone else. The body was a language, and in the Ottoman court, language could kill. Inside the cafes, the training hall, mirrored copper screens reflected rows of women practicing the same bow in unison. The mistress of conduct, a woman who had once served the Sultan's mother, watched in silence. "Again," she would whisper, "slower, as if you are made of silk." Each gesture was judged, each mistake recorded. A dropped fan, a tremor in the hand. These were failures not of grace but of loyalty. In the empire's theater of obedience, beauty was currency, but precision was survival. The rituals of preparation began at dusk. In candlelight, attendants brushed crushed pearls into the women's hair, mixed scents of amber and rose, painted kohl so thin it looked like shadow. Yet behind the cosmetic artistry lay danger. Some formulas contained mercury and lead, poisons that promised radiance but delivered ruin. Pale skin was prized, even if it came at the cost of trembling hands and fading vision. Before entering the Sultan's chambers, each woman underwent what the court called the purity rites. Bath attendants poured rosewater over their bodies, not as an act of comfort, but inspection. Every inch was examined, for scars, for marks, for signs of illness. The body did not belong to her. It belonged to the empire, to be catalogued and displayed like a relic. The ritual ended with a whisper from the mistress. "Remember, silence is safety." The final rehearsal was the undressing ceremony. What might seem intimate was instead performance, a ritual of power disguised as surrender. The concubine was trained to disrobe not before the Sultan, but before the unseen eyes of eunuchs behind latticed screens. Each motion was recorded in secret registers kept by scribes of the inner court. A misplaced hand or hesitant glance could decide her fate. Even the Sultan's presence could not break the performance. He was both audience and ruler, lover and judge. What he saw was not the woman, but the empire's discipline made flesh. Yet there were moments, brief, almost invisible, when the performance faltered. In the year 1535, a concubine known only as Nurbanu lifted her gaze too soon. The court chronicler wrote, "She looked upon His Majesty as though she saw a man, not a sultan." The next morning, she was sent away to the old palace. Her name was crossed out from the rolls. Even beauty, the record ends, could be a crime. The discipline of the harem was not confined to the body. It extended to thought. Women were forbidden to write without permission. Letters were dictated, inspected, and sealed with wax marked by the chief eunuch. Yet in the palace archives, historians have found hidden verses, written in invisible ink between lines of embroidery patterns. One reads, "He thinks we sleep. We only learn how to dream with open eyes." Through these fragments, a picture emerges of women who mastered the art of existing within invisibility. Their defiance was not rebellion, but endurance, a quiet reclamation of self under watchful eyes. They learned to act so perfectly that even truth became a role. By the mid-16th century, the theater of obedience reached its height. Ritual replaced emotion entirely. When the Sultan desired to test a concubine's devotion, she was made to perform the rite of stillness. For 1 full hour she would stand before him motionless while incense burned around her, her feet on cold marble, her breath measured. Some fainted. Others wept silently. The few who endured without movement were elevated, rewarded not for love, but for control. And yet, the empire that demanded such control could not control what lingered after. In the deep vaults of the palace, ledgers record every concubine by number, not name, but on the parchment's edge, invisible until light hits it at an angle, faint traces of ink remain. Handwritten, feminine, defiant. Some names were written back in by those who refused to forget. The archives whisper still. Women who became symbols, bodies that became scripts, voices that became echoes through centuries. Their obedience was never absolute. It was performance perfected beneath fear. Was this devotion or captivity? Ritual or survival? The line between them, blurred beyond recognition, became the empire's most enduring illusion. Tonight, the palace is silent. The corridors where they once rehearsed lie empty, their mirrors darkened, their scent long faded. But when the wind moves through the marble halls of Topkapi, it carries something faint, like the trace of rosewater or the rustle of silk, a reminder that obedience, once demanded, never truly disappears. It lingers, invisible, watchful, waiting for its next performance to begin.